everybody. My name is Lalit, Choda, and I'm going to be talking to you today about a practitioner's guide to managing non-human identity risks. I'm the founder and CEO of the Non-Human Identity Management Group. Just a little bit of background before we start into the discussion. I've been in the industry for 30 years, mainly sort of in the financial sector, investment banking, and 25 years ago I started working on a number of very large regulatory, IAM, PAM, NHI programs. So I've been dealing with sort of non-human identities for 25 years. Last year I decided, after running a huge NHI program at a large investment bank for a number of years, to form the Non-Human Identity Management Group. The mission of our group is to educate and evangelize around non-human identity risks and help organizations on their journey to sort of tackling what I would say is one of the hardest problems in the industry to solve. I guess a year into running this group, I'm now known in the industry as Mr. NHI. Written a number of white papers, research, including the ultimate guide to non-human identities. We have a thriving community, over 2,000 folks across the industry. We're all trying to work together to solve this problem. I guess the previous session around zero trust, workload, access was a great example of where the industry is trying to go to solve a very, very tough problem. So what I'm going to do is take you through like a real life example where one of the organizations I worked at and show you kind of how complex and challenging this problem is. Whilst there were things we can do kind of from a target state, zero trust, most organizations have a lot of technical debt, and that's why this problem is going to take a very long time for most organizations to get under control. So I'm going to take you through an example of why it took 3 weeks to cycle one password. And you'd be thinking, why 3 weeks to just change a password? And this example I'm going to take you through actually was then the trigger for starting a massive remediation regulatory program around addressing non-human identity risks at a large investment bank. So the story starts, I get a call from my CISO and head of IAM, and they say, we've just had a major production issue with one of our most critical business systems. We believe there was an issue to do with non-human identities. I guess in those days, we would call them technical accounts, service accounts, database technical accounts. And we need your help to kind of resolve this matter, and we need to get this under control. We need to cycle the password and secure this issue within 24 hours. So I started to talk to the application team, and what transpired was that someone in the IT organization was inappropriately using a non-human identity. In this case, it was an account used by a workload to connect to a database to perform some operational activities. But the IT person in question, they knew the password of this database account, and they were trying to connect to QA, but by mistake, they connected to production, right? So there's your first two issues around some of the risk with non-human identities. Humans inappropriately using NHIs to perform sort of operational activities. The second issue was the non-human identity database account in question. It wasn't properly segregated between prod and non-prod. It had the same password, and that's how the accident occurred. The person in question was running some SQL, thought they're about to update UAT, and they update production, and that's how we caused the big production impact. So we then start talking to the team, say, well, you need to cycle the password. Next challenge is, well, I don't know all the places where I'm referencing this NHI, this database account. It's all over the place in many scripts, many processes. We will need to, before we can cycle the password, we need to figure out where are all the places where this password is hard-coded, and And clearly, if you don't understand all those dependencies and you cycle the password too prematurely, you may miss some scripts that are using these credentials and therefore cause further operational risk. So we had to sort of figure out through some scanning techniques, where are all the code repositories where this credential is being used. And as we start talking further to the application team, they say, well, we've got another issue that we think over the years we actually may have given out this password to other teams, some upstream, downstream teams that need to connect to our database. Rather than giving them their own credential, we just said use ours, right? So sharing was going on as well. So not only did we have to fix the references of this credential within the application itself, we then needed to find out who else in the organization is using this database account. The application team said, we think we know 1 or 2 people that are using this account, but we don't know all the places. So then we had to think about how do we figure out who's connecting to the database. We speak to the database administrators, we turn on database logging, and then we can start to see all the connections coming in, all the different logging events, and we could see roughly about 8 other applications that were connecting in to the database, all sharing the same credential. So then, once we discovered who was sharing the credential, we then had to tell all those teams, you cannot share this credential anymore. You need to move to your own, dedicated identity to connect to the database. And again, same challenges. We don't know where all of our references are to that credential. It's going to take us time to sort of uncover all those dependencies. And that's why then, effectively with all the pressure from senior management, it took all those teams over 3 weeks to effectively move to their own credentials, test those changes in non-prod, and then propagate them to production. And then finally, after all the other application teams had changed and moved away to a different credential, the application team, which had the outage, then were able to change their password as well, and sort of then reduce the surface area of risk in terms of who knew the password. After this incident occurred, given how high it went up within the organization, my CISO said to me, look, this problem that you've been telling us about for years and years, that we decided we were going to not do at the time, because our focus was PAM and human access control, he said, like, immediately we need to start addressing this issue. So a quick recap, what were the key issues? So just in this one great example, you've got humans using NHI accounts inappropriately, you've got a lack of environment segregation, you've also got hard-coded passwords in source code, sharing of credentials, lack of monitoring controls, we didn't know who was using these accounts inappropriately, and clearly a lack of password cycling. So look, these are going to be the typical issues, risks that you're going to see within your organization, especially if you've got a lot of technical debt. So after that story, I start embarking on putting together a huge remediation global program to start tackling this exposure. And a few months later, a number of regulators around the world started to come in and ask us, what are your controls around non-human identities? Do you have hard-coded credentials? Do you cycle your passwords? Do you have monitoring controls? So not only did we have to initially declare this as a self-identified issue, we then came under huge regulatory scrutiny by all the biggest regulators that cover the financial industry, and we ended up starting running, which in the end I ran a $20 million program to manage this for this particular bank. And on top of that, we had to fix over 100,000 credentials, hard coding that we found in source code for some of our most critical apps. So I'm going to then just take you on a bit of a journey of, as we started the program, what did we do, looking at all the different lifecycle processes. first step, clearly, you need to look at is inventory, right? Until you know how many non-human identities you have, you don't know the size of the problem, you don't know how to control and manage that. Now, the organization in question was a heavy on-prem organization, so building an inventory of all your NHIs, your service accounts, your API keys, your tokens, was very, very challenging to do because you have to physically get to all the endpoints, to your databases, your Linux servers, your Windows servers, mainframe, and on those platforms you have a lot of local accounts, right? So you're not necessarily going to have a centralized, IDP where all your, NHIs are managed and defined. So you're going to have a disparate sources where you need to collect an inventory of all your NHIs. That in the end took us multiple years to sort of build all that connectivity to extract the inventory of all the NHIs that we had in the organization. The next challenge becomes who owns these accounts? Who do you go to start remediating, securing these credentials? Many of these accounts were created many, many years ago. No one knows, who's the owner, is it my account? Is it on my database? Is it somebody else's? Was it an account that was created years ago that's not in use anymore? So we had to build our own in-house sort of claiming ownership processes through some of our IGA tools. And again, multiple years to go through and claim and understand ownership. And then, people say, I don't know what this account is, then what do you do, where do you go to find the owner? You then need to give some warnings to say, look, if no one claims ownership, we're going to blow these accounts away. But clearly, if you get your analysis wrong, you could end up, as you remove accounts because you think they're not being used or haven't been claimed, you can still cause operational impact. Another big focus that we did, taking a risk-based approach, was hygiene. As I kind of alluded, a lot of the NHIs that have been created, we had hundreds of thousands of them. Many of them were not in use, they were created many years ago, and now orphaned, no one's using them anymore, but your surface area risk is still the same. If someone can discover one of those unused NHIs, they can find out the password, log into the database, and cause damage. So we then started to find not only inventory, we needed to find the metadata associated with all these accounts. When were they used last? Where was the connectivity coming in from? So hygiene, posture management was a key part. And we found, in excess of 50% of the NHIs that we had in the environment were legacy, not used. Again, over multiple years. Once we got the right telemetry around sort of usage patterns, we were able to then start cleaning up and removing many, many accounts, literally hundreds of thousands of accounts that are inactive, and reduce the surface area risk. So if you're thinking about how to start a de-risk, trying to clean up and do hygiene, one of the things we would suggest you do. I alluded to hard-coded passwords. Another key part of your strategy when you think about solving this problem is you need to find where are all your hard-coded credentials, typically in source code, Confluence, SharePoint, Slack channels. So you need to think about secret scanning. We didn't have any capabilities at the time, many years ago, so we had to bring in some sort of external product to do scanning. I would say scanning is going to be one of the toughest things you're going to have to deal with. Scanning is not perfect as a sort of a technology to uncover all your credentials. You're going to get a lot of false positives in what gets uncovered, and then you kind of need to deal with how do you process false positives. People can game the system. Another thing, we didn't really have a mature sort of vaulting solution. So whilst we had to deal with the hard-coded credential problem, the standard practice would be to then sort of move them into a vault solution. We picked a strategic solution, but again, onboarding credentials, hard-coded credentials onto a vault solution, again, is a non-trivial exercise. I'm sure many of you have done this within your organization, but if you haven't thought about how you onboard the credentials, how you deal with the metadata to describe what you're onboarding, you can create a real mess around how you sort of manage your credentials and how you vault them. Another key thing we started to look at was like, how do we stop the bleeding? Because developers are still checking in code, checking in secrets into their code, so we needed to figure out a way of how do we stop the bleeding. So we actually implemented some prevent controls. So at the point of checking in your code, if we saw a secret was being checked in, we'd actually block the checking at that time. So we were obviously over time able to sort of start slowing and reducing the problem set whilst we were fixing the existing issues we had. Another key part obviously related to that is CI/CD integration with your shift left strategy. You clearly need to have an integrated solution from your CI/CD processes into your vaulting solution and implementing some of those prevent capabilities. The next big challenge for us was dealing with cycling. This organization in question had no policies around cycling. They basically said if your passwords were 15 characters in length or more and complex, you didn't need to cycle your passwords. So, we literally had hundreds of thousands of credentials where the passwords have never been cycled. If you don't cycle on a regular basis, people will remember the passwords, and you're creating big risks around, transfer lever type scenarios. We've had many incidents where someone knew the password of a particular account, they moved to another team, and they were still using those accounts, many years later. Clearly, cycling can be challenging, can cause operational impact, and you also need to then have the capabilities or the endpoints to do the cycling itself. Another key area we looked at was kind of user behavior analytics, labor. I guess some people in the industry call that ITDR. We ended up picking a product to allow us to understand the usage of the NHIs. And one of the key areas we were looking for was humans using NHIs, and clearly that's inappropriate. Again, we made some inroads, but are very, very challenging to implement. Again, you see a lot of false positives in the data, and sort of just seeing the needle in the haystack is really, really challenging. So look, this is a large financial institution, a lot of legacy tech debt, but this hopefully gives you a little bit of a flavor of, the things that we had to do to sort of tackle the problem. And clearly from the previous session, you want to move to that more target state, zero trust workload model, but you're going to have a lot of technical debt that you need to kind of address and get under control. And we had no choice, because our regulators were saying you need to fix all your hard-coded passwords, you need to cycle on a regular basis. Okay, this is a diagram that group has put together about if you're thinking about how to manage sort of your lifecycle processes, these are kind of things you need to think about from a provisioning, discovery, classification, posture management, how do you then secure, monitor, and prevent. So if you're thinking about starting a journey on tackling NHI risks, these are the steps we recommend that you start thinking about as you define your processes and your controls. Okay, just a few minutes on lessons learned. This is a massive, massive problem. I say it's the hardest risk or challenge you're probably going to face in your career. My CISO, when we had this incident, said, why can't we fix this now in a year? I had to explain to him that this touches on all aspects of your IT processes and controls. You're going to need multiple years to solve this problem in most organizations. So clearly you need to take a risk-based approach, go after your highest risk assets, your highest risk accounts, your crown jewel applications. You also need to look at where have you got your weakest controls and figure out what is the fastest way that you can bring down that risk within your organization. There's a lot of talk around NHIs being an external threat. one of the reports we published a few weeks ago was 52 breaches. So we're seeing significant breaches now where hackers are discovering credentials that are available in public repos, API keys, tokens, and sort of compromising organizations and their third-party supply chains. But there's an internal issue that most of you will have within your organization. When we turned on our PAM controls, people didn't like using the PAM controls, raising tickets to get into production. So that we saw an exponential increase in people using NHIs inappropriately. So if you want to try and convince some of your senior management why you need to invest in an NHI program, it's not just about the external risk. There's a much bigger internal risk that you've got around compliance, your SOX controls. I can guarantee you're probably going to have SOX issues within your organization, maybe people updating books and records, because they're compromising these NHIs and doing that, using that for operational activities. Look, you've got to take a holistic approach, focus on people, process, and technology. Yes, there are solutions you need to think about, but you need to think about your strategy. You need to look at your policies, standards, what are your controls. The key part is education and training. We basically told our whole organization that if you continue to check in hard-coded credentials, it's a disciplinary thing, and you could even lose your job. So we needed the right top-down mandate to let people know that this kind of thing is just unacceptable in sort of modern environment. But I think you need to take a hybrid approach to how you manage your NHI risks. You've clearly got some existing debt that you need to tackle. And that's where, and a lot of the issues we have with NHIs are because most NHIs at the moment are static in nature. They get created, and they get left around, and then you need to kind of inventory, clean them up, secure them. And then clearly with maybe your crown jewel apps, or as you're moving to agentic AI, so from the previous session, you need to move to that zero trust model, just-in-time ephemeral secrets, and then over time, sort of improve your security posture and get away from the static secrets that many of you will have in your organization. Look, there's a lot of growth and a lot of work being done by many vendors in the industry, Google in the previous session, and there's some great solutions that have started to evolve over the last few years. When we started on our journey 4 or 5 years ago, these tools didn't exist. So we had to build this stuff from the ground up. Now, if I was to do that whole program again, I would definitely be picking some of the tooling that's out there. It will help you accelerate your risk reduction, remediation programs and get these risks under control. And look, as an industry, we're continuing to mature the whole problem around workload management, spiffy, Spire, some great standards. So look, as an industry, we're building great capabilities. And that's one of the reasons we formed the Non-Human Identity Management Group, to create a community and sort of help the industry come together to help solve this huge problem for the organization. Okay, that's pretty much kind of the talk. Just sharing some resources from our portal that you can read around the ultimate guide to non-human identities, breaches. We have a forum where you can ask questions, and learn all about the risks and challenges and best practices for managing NHI risks. So with that, we'll open it up for any questions.
Thank you. My question is that would you have
Can you start again, please?
If you did not have the incident that you had so many years ago, would you have got funding to all this? And what would be your suggestion to ask, with our management, how would you go about asking for funding for this kind of program?
Look, I think it's a problem that's waiting to happen, right? In terms of either your staff are using these accounts inappropriately today, so you've got huge compliance risks, or there's potential exposure, right, for these credentials to be discovered and some breach is waiting to happen. So look, you focus on your PAM controls, your human, this is the next logical step, and you've got to get it under control. So I think if you explain to people in terms of just the risk exposure and what you're going to do in terms of risk reduction for the organization, you're just sitting on potentially huge operational risk in terms of discovering of these credentials and getting them used. It's so easy for any person that knows about these credentials to cause huge damage to the organization. So it's a huge blind spot.
How did you convince leadership to terminate unused and unknown accounts?
Well, I think the key goal was around getting the right metadata to understand what was going on with those accounts. Things like last login information you get sometimes in some of those platforms. Through some of our monitoring controls that we implemented, we were able to get visibility on whether those accounts are being used. And that allowed us to build up the confidence to make decisions around hygiene, removal type activities. So again, you really need to have the right metadata and visibility to be able to make those decisions, especially for many credentials that have been out there for such a long time. But at some point, you're just going to say, well, screw it, we're giving people enough time, and then maybe try out, for example, removing the account in QA first, and see if something breaks there, and then if that's fine, then slowly stagger. I think you're going to do this over a prolonged period. You can't do it big bang, otherwise you're causing too much operational risk.
So in your experience, what organization models or structures you've seen of managing these NHIs at scale? Is it more prudent to manage it centrally within the IM team for an organization, or more of a distributed model with some oversight from the IM?
I think you start with a more distributed model, right? Because you're going to have IM teams, DevSecOps teams, and typically most organizations will not have really good controls and processes around this. And so you've really got to get your existing stack under control, try and de-risk, and then start to implement the right strategic processes, controls, and start enforcing the policies. A key part of it is your strategy, your architecture. If you've got big gaps around technology to manage these NHIs, you've got to start there, right, and think about what's your strategy, and clearly getting to a model where you can manage these identities in a central place is where you need to get to. Usually they're provisioned in so many different places, cloud, on-prem, so it's very hard to get. So I think the inventory, just getting a view of your accounts, the size of the problem is where you've got to start. Okay. We're done. Thank you all.